Hello? Can you hear? I'm loud anyway, so if this gets annoying, let me know. So since I am pinch hitting, and I don't totally know what the composition of the group is, how many of you guys are online publishers in some capacity, or journalists or writers? Hands? All right, cool. What are the rest of you? Volunteers. Mute works. All right, so a little bit more on my background. So I, as Sandy said, I'm a First Amendment lawyer. I, until very recently, was the First Amendment Fellow at the New York Times, where I did quite a lot of online publisher rights, as you can imagine. I also founded the Media Freedom and Information Access Clinic at Yale Law School, where we happen to litigate and support people who are working to free information online in a variety of capacities. And yes, that is loosey-goosey on purpose, because we want not only traditional journalists, but also people who are citizen journalists and working in a variety of different capacities. So that's kind of, and if you feel that you have litigation issues that you might need help with, the clinic is always willing to help, so come talk to me afterwards. In terms of the talk for today, it'll be very brief because I like asking questions or answering questions. I hope you like asking them. But the advice I usually give publishers is, if what you're going to say online is true, clearly your opinion, your content or content that you have obtained with permission, go for it. I'm not, even though I'm supposed to be a risk-averse lawyer, I'm not in the business of giving people too many rules, particularly when it comes to speech. Go ahead, go at it. There are three big areas that I do flag for people to just use as a guideline for thinking about the risks they may face online. So those are just the three things I'm going to lay out for you, and I hope that you use them when, of you, those who publish online, do so. And the others who don't, one day soon you will, I hope, and then you can think about these too. The first that gets the most buzz recently, or of late, but is probably not the most common, is the issue of retaliation. So in a variety of journalistic circles, people have talked about the need for circumvention tools and for surveillance, and the fact that in 2002, more journalists were killed in the course of the line of their work than in any year documented beforehand. The issue of retaliation is kind of fresh on people's minds. And retaliation takes a variety of forms, some of which the law can help and some of which need other forms. The first is the idea of your physical safety. There are no shortage of journalists who have paid in blood for what they write. This is not only journalists affiliated with institutions, but just people who choose to speak out about something that they care about. People do get killed for that. If you are publishing something and that is something that you have identified as in your risk matrix of possibilities, don't get a lawyer unless it's one for asylum to get out of that country. You have the advice that we do give, because people actually will come to lawyers. I've actually, in a pro bono capacity, been in that situation where someone says, hey, government X, I think government X is going to kill me for what I do. What do I do? And our advice is get out of the country and seek technological help at this point. Look at tools that you could be using. Think very carefully about whether you should be perhaps speaking out anonymously, what you can do to ensure the anonymity of your sources. Think about the tools that can help you there, not how the law can guarantee those things, because often that litigation happens after someone's already died. So there's a physical threat. Law doesn't really do anything. There is the cyber retaliation aspect of it, which I can now finally talk about, because last year, as some of you may have heard, in response for some publishing the New York Times was doing on China, we were the subject of some poking around in the Times servers. Again, if you think that that is part of the risks facing your online publishing, seek technological help. Do not try to get at the law to help you. In the United States, there is a case in the front of the Supreme Court right now that's pending. It's Amnesty International v. Clapper, in which the Supreme Court is considering whether journalists and lawyers who have sources that they would like to protect, or clients, if they suspect that they are under surveillance, so one form of, of a cyber intrusion is what they're doing, if they suspect they're under surveillance, whether they even have the right to challenge that in a court. That is how how behind we are in the law when it comes to that type of stuff, so law can't really help you there. But when it comes to retaliation, one area the law can help you in is that there's something called an anti-SLAPP lawsuit. SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. If you think that someone has sued you for defamation out of nowhere, someone is saying that you violated copyright when it's either your own content or you haven't, or when you feel that you're being harangued through legal means, that's not me, okay, for what you've been writing, you do have that type of recourse under the law depending on the state you're on. So seek a lawyer if you think that someone's just, trying to get you to shut up by legally bothering you. So it's kind of the retaliation universe of things, right? Not very common, probably not what you're going to come across every day, but it tends to get headlines and has had headlines lately, so I thought I would get it out of the way. Second big chunk is the idea of reputation. It is not your reputation, which does matter, and you should take care of that, but it is when you are writing online about something that may impact someone's reputation, which is common for activists. So-and-so is an awful, leader. So-and-so is responsible for human rights abuses. So-and-so has done this. When you are writing about things that impact someone's reputation, make sure it is true, or that you have a reason that you can document to believe that that is true. And the reason for that is that defamation lawsuits, of course, are unfortunately very, very, very common. Defamation is not, as many believe, someone saying something mean about someone else that isn't nice. That is a colloquial use of defamatory. Being rude about someone is not defamation. What defamation is a false statement of fact that injures someone's reputation. So, in the online space, same rules as in the meat space. Be truthful, document what you're saying, and if it's your opinion, if you think, I think that Pol Pot was awful, can't really sue you anymore, but, example. If that's what you think, make it clear that it's your opinion. Opinions are also given protection under defamation law, by and large. So, that said, not everything that's true is always easily protected. In the United States, at least, there is a crime, a tort, for the public disclosure of private facts. So if I say, my neighbor whose name is this, whose address is this, has the whooping cough, that is awful, that your neighbor could sue you, even though that's true, if they have a whooping cough, for it to be a public disclosure of what should be a private fact. Their medical histories are private fact. However, if it's newsworthy, whooping cough is an epidemic, and even my neighbor has it, whose name is this, whose address is this. It's now protected. So if you're saying something that is private, make sure it's newsworthy and there's a reason for you to say it. And you would think that this would all be obvious, but the amount of times that I have to go to court for these things means that it's not. So that's the reputation aspect of this. Really simple take home, make it true, make it easily documented. The third part that is very murky, and I imagine there'll probably be questions on, is the issue of copyright, which is a big old disaster often, but the rules are pretty simple depending on your risk appetite here. So if you're a publisher online and you have no money for lawyers, you don't want to deal with lawyers, you don't want to get in trouble, it's actually very easy for you. Make sure everything that you put up is your own content or you have explicit permission to do so, whether that be through a Creative Commons license or some other form of license that grants you that permission, or the creator of that content has actually explicitly given it to you. Nothing else, don't play fast and loose, don't try to play with fair use, don't do any of that. That's pretty simple, and for a lot of the smaller publishers that I've dealt with that are kind of, one, two-man shows, upstarts, that's the advice we give. Don't take risks unless you're willing to shell out, or either with time or money in court to back it up. Of course, the universe of fair use makes that all very complicated, because what fair use says is that if there are a variety of factors satisfied, whether something is newsworthy or a piece of the work that is not its heart or important for the purposes of parody, you can actually go ahead and use it. for all of that, what I do say is, like, fair use is something that I encourage people to exercise and feed its robustness, but it does sometimes mean that you'll get dragged into court to do that, right? People who are plaintiffs don't always love the defense of fair use. If that's the case, there are a number of free organizations or organizations that are willing to provide you pro bono free legal help to go ahead and do that. So those are kind of the big three chunks of things to think about that we give people who are publishing online. And with that, if you have some more specific questions, I would love to answer them if that is the type of thing we do.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Any questions? Yes.
So I don't want to hijack what you're doing. I just want to offer two other resources in this area. So if you're trying to do free publishing, free license publishing, or fair use stuff, there's an organization called questioncopyright.org that does really good work. It's run by Carl Fogel, who gives an awful lot of his time to give advice to people who are doing that sort of thing. So if you're doing anything that you're unsure of, he's a really good resource. That organization is a really good resource. The other thing is that if you're doing publishing in the context of free and open source software, there's an organization called the Software Freedom Law Center. And I have an affiliation there. They're great. They provide pro bono legal services to people who make free and open source software. So if your publishing happens in that context, and they do an awful lot of good copyright work, you can contact them. Help@softwarefreedom.org is the front door. Knock on it, they will respond. There are people in this room who are clients of the Software Freedom Law Center, and they will attest to the good work done by that organization.
Yeah, and Berkman has their Citizen Media Law Project.
Yeah.
They also have a network that is fabulous. You send an email, I'm on that now, or we get emails all the time from people who say, hey, I have this question. There'll be someone to answer your question. The clinic that I started at Yale tends to defend those who've committed to litigation and not so many pre-publication type questions, but that there are so many resources. I don't mean to be down on risk-taking when it comes to fair use or copyright. There's just so much misinformation out there about what fair use means, and I've had a number of clients who will say, oh, I use that, it's fair use, right? Why am I being sued? And the problem is just that when you articulate fair use, sometimes you have to throw some weight behind it. And that can be time-consuming, not necessarily costly, though, because there are all these really fantastic groups that are willing to help you out. So thank you very much for that. Yes?
I have kind of a very layperson's question. So someone's putting up documentation, technical documentation, someone's putting up a website for a technical user group, okay? In terms of, and there might not be anything immediately copyrightable or, really as a defensive purpose. Is there some way you recommend to, freely license the site or declare the license on the site? People put, CC on it, they do whatever, but is there a smart way to kind of approach that kind of question? Really as a defensive means more than anything?
So that's a little outside of my usual wheelhouse, so I'll flag that. Because we usually deal with more reporting type, whistleblowing type of things. That's what I usually deal with. But I would imagine that CC is a great way to make sure that you have a CC, the right license, because there are a multitude of Creative Commons licenses that have, conditions on how you share it, whether you have attribution or not, whether that's necessary, whatever. But Creative Commons is kind of the standard in the industry as a flag to be hey, this is fine, people use it, go ahead. And I would be very comfortable giving that advice. That is what probably the clearest flag that you can have on there.
What about SM? Whatever that stands for.
Service mark?
Sorry?
Service mark?
Right.
I haven't come across that as something that flags exactly what you're trying to get at, so it doesn't convey quite the same meaning as Creative Commons, which is come here, use this, it's great. SM I've seen, but it doesn't seem to have that same force behind it, so I would recommend Creative Commons. Yep. Right, you.
Excellent. So I am not in the publishing industry. I do nothing related to publishing. I guess I'm just curious. It seems like the root problem is not, litigation, how do we get in the courts? It seems like how do we change the law itself? So I'm curious, what are the efforts right now being done to sort of improve the actual legal structure? And B, is there anything that people currently who are not publishers and are not congressmen, can actually do to support that?
That is a great question. The law is an awful, messy beast. It is. It's actually really awful, which is how I make my money. So it depends on the area of law, frankly. So are you saying more in the copyright context or in the defamation context, all contexts?
Is there any
particular
area that's actually having progress?
I'm not sure that I would say that copyright is having progress, but there's quite a lot of activism that happens in that space. And part of the reason for this is that when things get bogged down in the court of law, you're subject to so many different random interpretations from random Judge X, all the way up to the Supreme Court, who even when they do have copyright cases, they don't actually give clear instructions. So in terms of the organizing to reform and lobby Congress when it comes to some of these laws, which would be a separate question from how do judges interpret this in a way that would be easily accessible for the layperson. I actually don't know. I know there's a chilling effects, and the EFF does a bunch of work like this. How successful they are, and whether there's a centralized movement for it, I'm just not familiar with. And then in terms of lay people, if there was a centralized group that was doing all of this, you should join that group. But I'm not really sure who's actually having successes or wins on these grounds. Yes?
So there is an effort right now to sign a petition on petition.whitehouse.gov to get an exception to the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, for jailbreaking and rooming cell phones.
Yes.
And that petition is it's got 5 days left. This is a thing that people would like the White House to respond to. And I know there's a lot of people who are trying very hard now to make a final push to get the requisite number of signatures. So this is an area you care about. If you care about copyright issues, maybe that's one thing you could do to chip in. And if you want to know the link to that website, I'll give it to Sandy.
Okay.
Get it.
Any other questions?
And I'll say that the guy who's active on that, I've been in contact with him the last couple of days, is the same guy who wrote that copyright manifesto for the Republican Party that they disowned. And so it's coming. There's a wide, but he's 20,000 signatures. They need 75,000, and he has 50.
They need 100. They have
80.
Yeah, they just raised 100 from 25.
Right.
Because of Aaron Swartz.
Oh, yeah, well, a few different
Right. So it's a little bit harder now than it used to be, but it's definitely doable. And I think as a community we can do it.
I've seen quite a few of the petitions happening in this area of intellectual property activism and freedom of speech and interest.
Do you know if there's a unified, if people are piecemeal putting together the petitions, or if there is some sort of concerted effort behind it?
I think it's piecemeal. It seems like everyone's totally anonymous. You put someone's, and everyone signs up under their initials. It's very.
Aaron Swartz's organization was Demand Progress.
Yeah.
I didn't know that they were doing a lot of copyright stuff, at least in this context, but I'm just curious.
It's funny. I follow it a little
one
bit.
place
It seems like as people put it up and then they send it to all their friends. It seems like very sort of anonymous. Things come together and they don't.
Any other questions? Yes.
So at the beginning you said if the journalist is overseas and he's worried for his safety, the technological tools is probably the number one thing we should be seeking. And so I guess these guys, OpenITP, are working on such tools. Well, I guess this is a question to you guys, but how does your efforts compare to other, agencies or corporations that might be doing the same thing, or is this it?
I can also speak. So I know a fair amount of the tools just because that is some of the stuff that I was doing at the Times. There are a number of guides out there that will lay out for you tools that are already available, like Tor, for example, that will be purposed in this space that was meant for a broader use, but is in fact incredibly useful for people who are speaking online. There are people talk about PGP being really useful in this context. For the thing that I was supposed to talk about tonight, which I will talk about right afterwards, there's a variety of reasons why that doesn't always work for Luddite journalists. But there are a number of tools that are out there. There are a number of groups too. So EFF has a great, like, I think it's the online self-defense or security self-defense initiative. There's security in a box. And all of these guides can be problematic in the sense that, like, they're either not thorough or they name outdated technologies. Like, I had seen several that list the Thuraya satellite phone as being something that journalists in the field should use. Now, the Thuraya satellite phone, vulnerabilities in it were posted online last year. If you have journalists in Syria, the last thing you should be having them do is uplink things from a satellite phone, from a Thuraya satellite phone. So there's the problem with one of the guides that are out there, or the guides that are out there, is that sometimes they're out of date as guides go, but there are a lot of people in this space that are working on it. Journalism Security, which is a group run by Frank Smith. I'm not sure that they've put together any of their classes yet, but what they do have is a list of different guides that are available online and a list of different actors who are working on this stuff. So I would check that out, just if you want like a big list of who's working on this kind of stuff.
Do you want to talk to them about your projects?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea.
So the project I've been working on, so by way of background, as I mentioned, a lot of the journalists that I have worked with have been stationed overseas in a variety of countries that don't always have the friendliest governments. I myself am Pakistani and have worked with a lot of activists there who have the same type of surveillance problems and issues and fears of retribution for what they're saying in that space. That's the case even here with journalists who write about national security or the NSA and worry that if they say, you know, the wrong 5 words that the Homeland Security has flagged as like dissidents words, they're going to end up on a list somewhere under surveillance, meaning that all of their sources will be compromised. It's a very real concern that people have, and yet these journalists are also people who, and sadly this is true and not hyperbole, use the word password for their passwords. I mean, they have no sense of technical security whatsoever because that wasn't their wheelhouse. That wasn't what they were supposed to do. That was something relegated to a few very specific journalists, sure, who were technically oriented, but it wasn't something that everyone had to know something about. And all of a sudden, the number of people who write and also need to be careful about how and in what form and to whom they are writing have all these technological concerns. And so in November at Yale, we held a big conference that Ella, wherever she is, was kind enough to come to my panel on and speak about this issue, about this disconnect between journalists and technologists. Technologists know how to use all this stuff, like, you know, setting up Thunderbird and using PGP is like old hat, like whatever. Everyone does it, everyone has a key, it's not a big deal. When you say PGP to the average journalist, they think you're telling them about a new bar or something. They actually don't know what it is. And that's kind of a disconnect that I'd like to work on fixing, not in the educational space, which journalism security and EFF are very active in. They have these guides, they have things they can hand you to say, read this, figure this out, and go forward. What I'd like to work on, along with 2 colleagues of mine at Yale and a friend at Poynter, which does a lot of journalistic work, is actually set up a task force in which journalists become clients of technologists. And they work together to develop what the new tools should be in this space. Not how do I use Tor, someone teach me, but can we think ahead to what our needs are on the user interface, what we need it to look like, so we can use it in the field or when we're wandering around wherever we are. Like make it easy, make it simple, make it for this clientele base, which often just isn't technologically savvy, and have the technologists in the room so they can actually hear that and then consult with them. What we're also in the process of doing is getting a few funding sources that are really committed to this idea in the same room too, so it's not only a space or a clearinghouse in which we can come up with really cool ideas, but also in one that if we need money behind it or if we need to make it bigger or commercial or whatever, we'd have the means to do so too. So I wanted to invite any who might be interested in that, I think I just ruined the microphone, to come up and talk to me about this because I would love to have your help. And we really, you know, in the spirit of these things, want to have a big inclusive group of participating people to figure out like what do we need here and how do we go about getting that to happen. So that was my little pitch for our Journalism Security Task Force.
Yay.
And yay! And we're in nascent stages, like we We've spoken to founders. We have a home app pointer, and we'll be doing the task force at Yale. We're willing to take people up there or have newer versions of it. So things are rolling, and we'd love to have you be a part of it. Thanks. There you go.
Thank you, Nabiha.
Get one more round of applause.